Chapter 25. Wednesday noon. Doreen caught sight of a whisper across Steve's face, a whisper of fear or a whisper of maybe panic. And then he schooled his features to just glare at her. "You don't know anything." And this time he took off down the aisle. One of the women watching the play-by-play with interest said, "Is he involved in one of your cold cases, dear?" Doreen looked at the woman who had more purple in her hair than the royal purple shirt she wore and smiled. "I'm not sure," she said, "but maybe." The old woman nodded. "I wouldn't doubt it. He's a dodgy one." "In what way?" Doreen asked. "3 wives," the woman announced. "First one disappeared, second one took off, and then the third one, well, nobody has seen her for years." Doreen froze. "What?" The woman went off in peals of laughter. "He didn't kill them though," she said with a big chuckle. "I was just having some fun with you. His first wife took off with another man. The second one he ditched in town, and they split up soon after. No clue what happened to the third one, but I'm sure she made a better decision than to hang around him." And at that she took off, pushing her buggy, half bent over the small cart with a big smirk on her face. Doreen stared at her in fascination. What the heck did that mean, she asked. Of course she would love to find something creepy or criminal in Steve's past to confirm how something was off about him. The fact that he was hanging around her now and was friends with Penny, already in jail for murder, was disturbing enough. Doreen had caught somebody in her backyard, but she didn't know who it was, and of course she and Steve had already had their altercations. That didn't mean he had anything to do with this current case. But she filed it away. You never knew what might come down the road. Worrying about the craziness of some of the local, more colorful people, she wandered back to her vehicle, packed up, and made a quick dash home to unload what food needed to be refrigerated. Muggs could smell his treats, even in their unopened packaging. "I'll give you something special when I return." "Okay, Muggs." Then, checking her watch, she would be late if she didn't get a move on to Clara's place. Driving carefully, she finally pulled in front of Clara's house, parked, and got out. Clara was waiting on the front step for her. Doreen rushed ahead, apologizing. "I'm so sorry. The grocery shopping took a little longer than I expected." "I thought you were going to walk," Clara said curiously, looking around. "You don't have any of the animals?" "No. I was out of time, so I came straight here from home, after putting up the meat in the fridge," Doreen said. Clara shrugged and let her into the house. "Come through here to the bedroom." As Doreen followed Clara down the hallway, she saw a master on the left and a small bedroom on the far back right. "Did you have a boyfriend at the time Crystal disappeared?" Clara gave her a sharp look. "Yes, I did," she said. "I was finding my feminine side again. Nothing like being replaced to make you feel like you don't have what it takes anymore." Doreen didn't say anything because that certainly hadn't been her instinctive reaction as a way to handle it, but she knew a lot of women who immediately went out and found new relationships. She'd heard the term hump and dump them, but that was too rude and crude for her. She stepped into the little girl's bedroom, and it was like going back in time. "Have you taken anything out of here since then?" "No, it's exactly the same as when she disappeared," Clara admitted. "I left it so that when she came back it would feel like home. But of course the real truth of the matter is, I have no idea if she's ever coming back. And when she does, it's already been 10 years, so she's 18. There isn't anything she wants here now." "I don't know about that," Doreen said. "I can't even begin to speak to her mindset. But I do think, knowing you've kept all her stuff still, that will probably make her feel very nice." "I doubt it," Clara said with a note of bitterness. "I'd love to believe she's alive. But if she is, why wouldn't she have contacted me?" "Only 2 reasons come to mind," Doreen said carefully. She stepped forward to the bed, sitting down at the edge, her hands going to the pillow. Either she couldn't, or she didn't want to. On that last bit, she stole a glance sideways at Clara to see her face twist. Is there any reason why she wouldn't want to? Clara looked at her and frowned. I don't think I like what you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything, Doreen said quietly. And you know perfectly well the police have asked much worse. Isn't that the truth? Clara cried out. They suggested all kinds of horrible things back in the day. I'm sure they did, Doreen said, but in reality they did so for Crystal's benefit. When they're trying to find a child, they want to make sure they turn over every stone. Well, they scared my boyfriend away at the time too, Clara snapped. What was his name? Doreen asked. She had her phone out, and she put it on audio and video. Tom Delaware. I really liked him, she said with a heavy sigh. But I don't know that it would have lasted. Why didn't he stick around? He didn't like the police digging into our lives, she said. He was on the run from an ex-wife and kids, and didn't want to pay child support. I didn't know that at the time, of course, so it was a bit disconcerting when he took off with that as his excuse. He told you that was his excuse before he left? Doreen asked curiously. That's kind of odd, isn't it? Wouldn't he have tried to avoid telling you why he was leaving? I have no idea, she said. How long had you known him before he took off? Just a few months, but we were only close for a few weeks. It was really tough for a while there. And with my daughter going back and forth between my place and her father's, for the first time, I had some freedom. Some evenings to myself where I could pursue a relationship. So I did. And it went on until my daughter disappeared, and everything blew up. It would have been nice if Tom had stuck around to help me get through it, but he didn't, and so I had that to deal with as well. What was your relationship like with your husband during that time? Caring mostly, although there were some arguments, but nothing serious, she admitted. For a while there, I wondered if all our problems were under the bridge and if we would get back together again, but it didn't happen. Mary was firmly entrenched in his life and in his home, and she made sure we didn't get any closer to each other. Was he equally devastated at Crystal's disappearance? Yes, Clara said abruptly. I know the police looked into him very carefully, but they never found anything. And I truly believe he was devastated and wouldn't have done anything to hurt her. She was our only child, and he's never had any children with anyone else, so now we're both childless. A sob escaped from her throat. You've never wanted to have any more? Doreen asked. I've wanted to, she said. But how do you move on from something like that? I also didn't have a relationship, so that didn't help. I didn't want to be a single parent. I wanted to be a parent to Crystal with Eric. It was really tough. Have you got any working theories as to what happened? I had lots back then, but now over time, it makes me wonder if I saw anything clearly, she said, sitting down beside Doreen on the bed, her hand grabbing a handful of the comforter and squeezing it tight. I still think Mary had something to do with it though. What about friends? Did Crystal have any close friends? She did at first, but not really after we separated. None of her friends' parents were going through divorces, and it was very difficult for those parents to understand what we were going through, and the other parents didn't want their own children to witness Crystal's parents splitting up. I don't know what to say, but for a long time, Crystal didn't want to come home anymore. Ouch, Doreen said. That would have made it very difficult. It did, Clara said. I mean, how do you handle that? Did she want to go to her father's then? She told me that she didn't want to be with either of us until we stopped fighting. And we did fight, but it was just our relationship. And she didn't like having two homes. She always wanted to see what the other was having for dinner, before she would settle into eating dinner at one place or the other. But she didn't like Mary, I know that. Any idea why? Clara just shrugged and said, "No, not really." Crystal said she didn't like the way Mary looked at her sometimes. Doreen nodded. "I think children, like animals, have a strong instinct when it comes to people. She may very well not have gotten along with Mary, but that doesn't mean Mary had anything to do with her disappearance." "No, but it also doesn't mean she didn't." "Do you want Mary to be guilty?" Doreen asked point blank. "Because that's what it sounds like." Clara sobbed for a moment and then choked it back. She stood, wrapped her arms around her chest and paced the small room. "It's all I could think about at the time. And I don't know if that was misplaced anger on my part because ultimately Mary split us up," she said. "My husband told me that he wanted a younger woman, and he wanted to be with Mary, not with me." "Ah, so it wasn't a mutual breakup?" "Well, I definitely wanted to break up when I found out he was already sleeping with her. But before that? No. I was doing everything I could to save my marriage. But he had already hooked up with Mary, and he's never looked back." "How long were you married?" 10 years, she said on a bitter laugh. "As long as he's been with Mary now. For me, those years just seem like a long time ago because I haven't really moved on. I haven't filled the 10 years since with anything good, whereas he's had a brand new relationship to help him get through it." "So you were married to him when he was criminally charged?" At that, Clara sat down with a heavy sag. "Yes," she said, "technically yes. I didn't realize what he was doing. He says he didn't understand or think that he'd get caught. He ran a pawn shop where people would bring him stuff, and he'd try to resell it online. He did a lot on eBay and websites like that." "I'm sorry," Doreen said, but she didn't understand. "So you didn't have any part in it?" Clara's back stiffened. "No," she said. "I never really thought about where he got this stuff. He said he picked it up in auction lots and things like that. But obviously he was lying, but then he lied about a lot of things, like Mary, for instance." Doreen waited to see if more explanations were coming. And then finally, Clara raised both hands in frustration and said, "It doesn't really make much difference, but apparently he was with Mary for several months before we split, and then he broke it off with her while we were splitting up. Then, all of a sudden, Mary moved into the house. That was my house, you know," she said with a sad look at Doreen. "I bought this one afterward with my mother's help. So I could stay close. I told myself it was so I could stay close to my daughter, and that was true. But I also wanted to stay close to my husband, but that just made it worse when he and Mary got together publicly. She moved into the house as soon as she could. I swear, she moved in the night I moved out. I was pretty upset for a long time. I'm sure it affected Crystal." "Maybe," she said, "but I didn't have anything to do with her disappearance." "Is there anybody who would have helped her run away and stay away all this time?" Clara just stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is there anybody, family, friends, grandparents, who would have given her a home and not told you what they were doing?" "No, absolutely not. We're all very close." Doreen just smiled and nodded but didn't say anything, because very close didn't sound like what Clara was describing. "Is there any reason Crystal would want to get away from the family?" "I know she wanted to get away from Mary. And yet, she didn't sleep here all the time, did she?" Clara's shoulders slumped at that truth, but she shook her head and said, "No, you're right. She'd always go back again to Eric's house where Mary was." "So, how bad was it really over there?" "Probably not as bad as I wanted it to be," Clara said. "Maybe I just built it up more in my mind, because I don't like the woman." Doreen privately thought that was likely true. What about at school? Was anybody bothering her, like a school bully? Did she have a problem with a teacher or the principal, or any adult? Clara just stared at her. "I don't like that question either," she said. As far as I know, nobody would have kidnapped her and hurt her or helped her escape from me and my husband. Good, Doreen said briskly. That's what I needed to know. She wasn't going to mention any suggestion of abuse. She figured the police could handle that part of this mess. Clara straightened up and said, "Look. I'll put on a pot of coffee. I presume you want a few minutes to just check out her room." "Absolutely," Doreen said with a smile. She waited until Clara was gone, and then went through the dresser and the night table. A diary would have been lovely, but Crystal had been only 8, so maybe young for such an activity. And if she had chance, her mother would have gone through anything like that pretty carefully. Doreen checked under the sheets and between the mattresses and behind the dresser, and pulled out the drawers and checked behind there too. Going through Nan's stuff had taught her all that. Finally, by the time Clara returned, Doreen stood in the room with her hands on her hips. "Did you find anything?" "No," Doreen said. "Obviously, if something were hidden here, the cops would have found it long ago." "Exactly," Clara said. "There are no pictures on the wall," Doreen noted. "No stuffed animals on the bed. No dolls on the floor. Did you pack up any of her things?" Clara shook her head. "It's almost like she didn't have a personality." "She slept here, that's for sure," her mom said. "She did a lot of homework here on her computer." "Where's her computer?" Clara shook her head. "I don't know. I thought about that, but I don't have a clue where it is. I asked Eric about it, and he said he thought it was with me." "A laptop?" Doreen asked. Clara nodded. "Her father bought it for her." "That's a pretty expensive gift for a young girl." "Oh, it wasn't new," Clara said. "It was one more of those things he used to buy and sell." "Ah," Doreen said. "Any idea if she took it to the mall, or with her to her friends' houses?" "She took it with her everywhere. Sometimes she and her friends would sit in these little parks and play games together on each other's laptops. They also took them to the library downtown." "Right," Doreen said. "Any idea when Crystal's laptop might have gone missing?" "No, but I figured it must have been that same night. Because it's not at my place and it's not at his. So where else could it be? That means it was important to her if she took it with her. Or somebody understood she played with it or thought there might be incriminating evidence on it," Clara said, "and took it with them." "Right," Doreen said as she cast a final glance around the room. "I guess there's no chance to get into her room in her father's house, is there?" Clara looked at her in surprise. "Actually, there is. They're gone for the week, and I'm looking after the plants and the cat." "Oh, you're that good a friend?" "I am with my husband. I tolerate Mary." Clara was still using the term husband, not ex-husband, which Doreen thought very odd. And very sad. Clara's view on their married relationship sounded at odds with the arguing she had mentioned as well. Maybe she still loved her ex-husband? Still wanted him back enough to gloss over the fighting? "Would you mind? I'd like to take a quick look." "I guess that's even more important because that's where she was taken from." "Yes," Doreen said. They exited Clara's house and walked across the street. Eric's house was almost a matching bungalow on the other side. Clara let them in the front door and said, "I have to clean the litter box and feed the cat anyway. Go down that hallway. Crystal's room is at the end." Doreen wasted no time. She headed toward Crystal's room, curious to see just what this was all about. As she stepped inside, she saw another room stuck in time. She stood with her hands on her hips, wondering how she would handle such a thing. Would I keep it as a shrine to my lost child? Would I keep it with everything exactly as she left it, hoping she'd come back and remember this was home? Would I lock the door to her room, so I didn't have to see it every day? Would I pack it all up, store it in the attic, and convert this room to a guest room or as an exercise room? All of it seemed psychologically damaging, no matter which way you went. Doreen went through the closets and through the bed and the dressers. She saw a few toys, but not much was here either. She'd have to ask for that list of toys that disappeared with her. And was the laptop even on that list? How many 8-year-olds had their own laptop? She frowned at that, thinking it was fairly odd. Especially 10 years ago, when they were quite pricey. Then again, her father likely got a deal, and chances were it wasn't in great condition. As Doreen went through the closet, she found it went quite deep. She pushed all the clothes and the hangers off to one side and stepped farther in, using the flashlight on her phone. In the back on a set of shelves was a small box. She pulled the box into the room and took a look at it. It was an old laptop box and still had some manuals and things in it. She flipped through it all, but there wasn't much except the serial number. She took a photo of that, replaced the box, and pulled another box from the shelf. She found some old cards from classmates and family members, but she found nothing important until she got to the bottom of the stack. A picture of Crystal and several other people. They all appeared to be happy. She was held aloft by 2 big men, and a woman stood beside them. She pulled out the photo as Clara walked into the room. Doreen held it up and asked, "When was this taken?" Clara stared at it. "I never saw that before." "Is that Mary?" Clara nodded and asked, "Who are the men beside her?" The 2 women looked at the photo and Clara burst out, "Oh, that's Jose and Guido, Mary's brothers."